was one of the most important men in European and world history. He was Constantine, also known as Constantine the Great, the first Christian Roman emperor. Who was Constantine and where did he come from? To set the stage for his appearance, we have to go back just a little before his time. The Roman Empire had reached its peak in conquest. Roman armies were busy trying to hold on to what territory had been won. The empire's thousands of miles of European frontier were being overrun by barbarian tribes. Throughout Europe, a curtain of gloom and hopelessness descended, and the period of the Middle Ages, often called the Dark Ages, began. The Dark Ages were 1,000 years that saw warring tribes fighting for land and possessions, a time of hunger and plague. The darkness was deepest during the years between 400 AD and 1000 AD, when all creative intellectual thought and cultural development disappeared from Europe. Life in medieval Europe was one of non-stop warfare, lawlessness, corruption, and an obsession with mythology and superstition. There were some new things. The 4th and 5th century saw some major changes in European lifestyles. At the beginning of the 4th century, Diocletian was the Roman emperor. Diocletian divided the empire in half, the dividing line being roughly south from the Danube River. After Diocletian abdicated the throne, the divided empire was ruled by two men. Constantine was the son of one of the generals in charge of the army defending the northern borders of the Roman Empire. Constantine's father ruled from a capital at the modern-day city of Trier in Germany. Upon his father's death, Constantine's army declared him leader in his father's place. But Constantine still had one obstacle to complete power. That was the Roman leader Maxentius, whose army was fortified in Rome. Constantine stormed into Italy and defeated Maxentius at the Battle of Milvian Bridge over the Tiber River. He consolidated his power and became the sole ruler of the Western Empire. And thus began the remarkable story of Constantine the Great, who transformed the Roman Empire, Europe, and Christianity.
When you're talking about Rome in the 4th and 5th centuries, you're talking about a period of incredible transformation. And perhaps the biggest of these transformations is the Christianization of the Roman Empire. Constantine was the emperor who initiated this change. Constantine was having a huge battle for control of the empire in 312. And at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, the day before the battle, Constantine had a dream. And he dreamed that he heard a voice. And the voice said, "Under this sign you will conquer." And in the sky there was a huge Chi Rho, which was the symbol of Christianity. Constantine put the Chi Rho on his banner and led his troops into battle. He won the battle, and after that battle then converted to Christianity. Now, before this, Christianity had been illegal in the Roman Empire. In fact, it had been persecuted. But Constantine's acceptance of the religion made it tolerable. And throughout the 4th century, then, Christianity became increasingly popular to the point where it became, in fact, the religion of the state. By the end of the 4th century, other pagan religions, in fact, had been banned throughout the Roman Empire. And Christianity was really the only religion that was allowed.
Constantine the Great made two of the biggest decisions in world history. The first was to make Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. Constantine's victory in 312 AD over an enemy protected by ancient gods persuaded him to become a Christian. His famous Council of Nicaea produced the Nicene Creed, which, with some variations, is familiar to Christians today. After his death, the Christian religion continued to grow and eventually changed the face of the world.
The other huge transformation that goes on in this period is the entrance of the Germanic people into Rome. And for years, the Germanic warriors had been serving in the Roman army. But in the 4th century, we start to see a mass migration of Germanic people and entire families and communities coming into the borders of the Roman Empire, not just warriors. Most of these people are fleeing the Huns, who are a tribe far to the east. and seeking shelter in the Roman Empire. But the entrance of this huge number of Germanic peoples into the western part of the empire starts to change the character of Rome. And this is often described as a period of barbarian invasions. You shouldn't think of these as organized invasions. They're sort of huge roving communities that move through the Roman Empire. And then they start to settle in different parts of the empire. You have the Ostrogoths who settle in the area around Italy. The Visigoths move through Rome into Spain. The Vandals move all the way through Spain down into North Africa. And the Franks then settle in what's now France and Germany.
The second important decision Constantine made was to found the city of Constantinople in the year 330 and move the capital of the Roman Empire there from Rome. The move signaled the growing divide between the eastern and western parts of the empire, which eventually led to the division of the empire into a Greek East and a Latin West empire. In 1930, Constantinople was renamed Istanbul.
Another huge shift then is a move eastward in the centers of power of the Roman world. For centuries, the Roman Empire had centered itself around the city of Rome. But Constantine, after his conversion to Christianity, wants to create a fresh start. He wants to create a Christian capital of the empire instead of relying on the pagan capital at Rome. So he founds the city of Constantinople. This then moves attention away from the Roman world and shifts power to the east. 4th and 5th centuries, then, you generally have two Roman emperors, one ruling the eastern half of the empire, centered around Constantinople, and one ruling in the western half, centered around Rome. In the 5th century, the Western Roman empires start to weaken incredibly, in large part due to the influence of these Germanic tribes moving through their territory. By the very end of the 5th century, the Roman Empire in the West has grown so weak that Ottawak, one of these Ostrogothic kings, gains the power to totally depose the young Roman Empire in the West. And instead of proclaiming himself a new emperor, Ottawak simply says that he is going to be the king of the Ostrogoths, who will rule over Italy, and he will then rule in the name of the emperor in the east. But after Ottawakar's victory, which comes in 492, there are no longer any emperors in the west.
Constantine had an unshakable commitment to Christianity, and probably his greatest achievement was leaving the church in a position to flourish, even during the darkest ages that followed his death. In the east, Constantine's empire survived for another 1,000 years, preserving not only the Christian religion, but also much of ancient Greek and Roman culture that might have otherwise been lost. Constantine's significant and lasting contributions definitely earned him the title of Constantine the Great. With the collapse of the Roman Empire, control of Western Europe was divided among nomadic tribes into small Germanic kingdoms. Principal among these were the Ostrogoths, or East Goths, and Visigoths, or West Goths. For centuries, these tribes had been envious of empire prosperity. Then suddenly, the Goths faced a fearsome threat from the plains of Mongolia. The Huns, setting new standards for savagery and terror, attacked the Goths and drove them southward and westward across the Danube River, setting off a chain reaction which could only end with the inundation of the empire itself. The Huns became known as the Scourge of God. To the Romans, they seemed the embodiment of Antichrist and to herald the coming of the apocalypse. By the 5th century AD, the map of Europe showed these major tribal divisions. The Franks dominated the area of modern France and Germany. The Visigoths settled in Spain, later replaced there by the Arabs. The Lombards settled in northern Italy. The Vandals roamed unchecked across large parts of Gaul in an orgy of devastation so vivid that their name has remained synonymous with wanton destruction ever since. The Anglo-Saxons settled in England. The Anglo-Saxons went a stage further than most other tribes, imposing their language and culture for all time on the lands they conquered. These tribes left an indelible mark on the map of Europe. The names of many modern geographic areas such as France, Lombardy, and England came from the people who conquered them.
The Germanic tribes in many ways are not as culturally advanced as Roman ancestors. And though they incorporate some of these Roman ideas and Roman writings into their culture in these kingdoms they establish, it's a period in which literary and cultural endeavors fall into decline because of this loss of literary and elite culture that occurs in this period.
The Dark Ages were years of brutality. People's daily lives were filled with violence. More people were murdered than died from accidents. People generally married someone from their village, and families stayed close to home, especially at night. Local dialects were often incomprehensible to people a few miles away. Surprisingly, these often bloodthirsty people were devout Christians. As the barbarians came under the civilizing influence of Christianity, the church became more barbaric. Contributing to the general insecurity were the epidemics that struck over and over. Smallpox, dysentery, all kinds of respiratory diseases, rickets, and malaria were common in many areas. Above all, there were the Great Plagues that often took nearly half the population of some cities. For centuries, having enough food, not to mention good food, was a great luxury. One of the most striking things about the people of the Middle Ages was how young their average age was. They tended to die young, too. The average age as late as the 15th century was 21, even for aristocrats. As many as half the babies born would die before they reached the age of 1. It was common for women to die during childbirth. They were very superstitious. Some of them believed the Roman collapse was caused by neglect of the old pagan rites. St. Augustine countered that argument in his famous writing, The City of God. During this time, the people looked to the church and its saints for leadership, security, and protection. The church ruled the people by promoting the fear in them that if they did wrong, they would be punished by God. People also looked to the clergy to intervene with God on their behalf. Often these same monks would carry knives under their clothing for their own protection. While the Germanic tribes dominated Western Europe, it was the Greek-speaking East Romans who dominated the lands of the Eastern Mediterranean. There they kept the flame of the classic civilizations burning. Ruling from Constantinople, these so-called Byzantine emperors claimed to rule the Western Empire as well as the Eastern.
I keep emphasizing that this was a period of rapid change and dramatic change in redefining what Rome was. And one of the biggest illustrations of this comes in the 6th century with Justinian. Justinian is the emperor of Constantinople, the emperor in the East. And ostensibly then, the Ostrogothic king in the West rules Italy for him. But Justinian has decided that he wants to reunite the empire. He wants to reclaim all of the old Roman territory in the West. And to do this, he in fact launches an invasion. So if you were living in Italy in this time, here's this person who is ostensibly your ruler, coming in and leading an army on a very destructive campaign. Southern Italy especially gets devastated by these wars as Justinian attempts to reclaim all of this imperial territory. Justinian is partially successful. He expands the boundaries of the Eastern Roman Empire, but he doesn't realize his dreams of recreating the emperor in the West and reclaiming all of that territory.
The Roman Empire in the West fell in 476. The empire in the East, the Byzantine Empire, lasted until 1493. At the distance of many centuries and thousands of miles, the civilization of the Byzantine Empire presents an appearance of unity. Taking root on Eastern soil, flanked on all sides by the most widely dissimilar peoples, Orientals, Finnic-Ugrians, and Slavs, some of them dangerous neighbors just beyond the border. Others settled on Byzantine territory. The Byzantine Empire was loosely connected on the west with the other half of the old Roman Empire. And so the development of Byzantine civilization resulted from three influences. The first, Alexandrian Hellenic, the second, Roman, and the third, Oriental. The later expansion of the power of the Osmanli Turks prepares the annihilation of the Byzantine Empire.
The Ostrogoths then had taken control of Italy, the fall of Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor in the West. But they weren't the only Germanic kingdom in the region. What we see is all of these different Germanic tribes sort of have their own kingdom that gets set up. The Visigoths, who are the sort of the Western Goths, set up a kingdom in Spain. And one of the kingdoms that will become most important as we sort of move forward into the 7th and 8th century is the Frankish kingdom, which gets set up in modern-day France and Germany. Clovis is a warrior king who unifies this area and sets up the Merovingian dynasty, a dynasty of these Germanic warriors who rule over what's modern-day France for several hundred years.
The power of the Frankish rulers rested primarily on their powerful armies. The motivation for their conquests was the need to obtain treasure and money with which to reward and keep their warriors' loyalty. Clovis eventually destroyed his rivals and united the Franks under his rule. His victories began Frankish domination over the Germanic peoples east of the Rhine.
This is also a time where there's a huge shift between the city and the countryside. Rome had always defined itself by its cities. It was a very urban civilization. Most of the people actually lived in the countryside, but the cities really were the centers of culture and how the society really saw itself. But in this period, we see a change in that too. Cities are dramatically declining, both in population and in importance in the West. So we see a shift away from these large communities, and increasingly the powerful people in society are moving into the countryside and building their own fortified villas where they can protect themselves both from other elites and from the state as a whole.
The majority of the population in medieval Europe lived much closer to nature. Europe at this time was covered by a primeval forest that didn't have roads or even trails to follow. A person venturing into the vast and terrifying dense forest would almost certainly become lost and fall victim to the bears, boars, and especially wolves who wandered there. They roamed into the fields, towns, and cities. The peasants had to hunt them for their own protection as well as food. People would go into the countryside to gather honey, berries, and other fruit also. But most of their diet was cereal. The cereal was made from grain, and its availability was dependent on the size of the harvest. In the 7th century, when the Christian church was still struggling to put together its principles and establish its dominance over what had been the Roman Empire, it faced a new rival. The spread of the religion of Islam threatened its very existence. Unlike Christianity, Islam's rise in popularity was not a matter of centuries, but of decades. By 720, the Muslim armies of the Islamic Church and Muhammad's followers had moved out of the Arabian Peninsula and conquered the whole southern shore of the Mediterranean, Syria, Persia, Egypt, all of North Africa, most of Spain, and into Aquitaine in southern France. The two outstanding monuments from this early phase of Islam are the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem and the Great Mosque of Damascus.
The Mediterranean Sea was really the center, in a lot of ways, of the Roman Empire. It was sort of a freeway that allowed commerce, cultural exchange from one part of the empire to the other. But in the 7th century, this changes dramatically with the rise of Islam in the Middle East. The Islamic religion is spread by initially the Prophet Muhammad, who has his revelation in 610, and makes dramatic political moves to unify a lot of the Bedouin tribes in that area, and then spread north and east. And within 100 years, Islamic tribes have conquered almost all of northern Africa, They've in fact moved up into Western Europe, into Spain, and have taken over a lot of the lands in the Middle East that were in the possession of the Eastern Roman Empire. So all of a sudden, this territory, which had always been thought of as Roman, was suddenly cut off. And instead of the Mediterranean marking sort of a crossroads from one part of the empire to the other, it suddenly became a boundary.
Muslims had occupied Jerusalem since the year 638, taking it over only 6 years after the death of Muhammad. The city of Jerusalem has religious treasures for the followers of both Islam and Christianity. Muslims believe it to be the site from which Muhammad ascended into heaven. To Christians, Jerusalem is sacred as an important site in the life of Jesus. In large part, Western Europe, which was mostly Christian, began to recognize itself as a distinct civilization by distinguishing itself from the Islamic culture. In 687, Pepin of Heristal, a Merovingian ruler, united the Frankish territory. He was succeeded by his son Charles Martel, who formed an alliance with the Church, which helped the Merovingian dynasty, as well as Christianity, to expand into Germany. After the fall of Rome, Charles Martel led an army that defeated the Muslim Saracens in a decisive battle at Poitiers in southern France. This victory ended the expansion of Islam in Western Europe.
Muslims, as I said, had pushed all the way up, all along the North African coast and into Spain, and were threatening to invade France itself. And there was a big climactic battle at the town of Poitiers, where Charles Martel, who was the general of the Merovingian kings, rallied the Frankish armies to stop the Muslim advance. And he stops them at the Pyrenees, the big mountain that's the border between Spain and France. And this was a huge victory. It reversed what had been a series of successes for the Islamic armies, and dramatically increased the power of Charles Martel, or Charles the Hammer. That's what the name means. And it was Charles Martel's grandson who would eventually found a new empire and try to revive these classical Roman ideas and unify a larger territorial area. His grandson then was Charles the Great, or Charlemagne.
The defeat of the Muslims at Poitiers by Charles Martel resulted in the Franks consolidating their power over Western Europe. Pepin the Short succeeded his father Charles Martel. Pepin founded the Carolingian dynasty and was crowned king by Saint Boniface. His son Charlemagne inherited the Frankish kingdom in 771. Thus ended the age of Constantine and the Germanic invasions, and the beginning of the age of Charlemagne.